Posthumous monolith of science fiction Philip K. Dick said that he wrote in that genre because there was more latitude for the expression of truer ideas. The focus on exploring ideas that serves as much of the appeal of science fiction means that often writers can get themselves into trouble. They can litter their stories with all sorts of logical lapses by focusing more on metaphor than logical consistency, either in terms of the characters or the aspects of the technology. Not that this is unique to science fiction, but when a storyteller is making up whole new technologies and worlds, there's a lot more latitude to screw up in ways that most literary fiction doesn't usually have to worry about. Furthermore, none of these plot holes are in any way ruinous for their stories. It's just sometimes surprising what writers can get away with while the audience is distracted by lasers and other wonders of the future. And probably not a surprise, but there are spoilers ahead. Number 10. Avatar. Not just the most successful science fiction story, but this is the highest grossing film of all time. In 2009, it was much the novelty of the gorgeously rendered environments as the story that drove it to gross $2.7 billion. The story about a disabled soldier's consciousness being connected to a bioengineered alien body to serve as an ambassador seemed practically like an afterthought. Nowhere is this more obvious than in writer-director James Cameron's blatantly slipshod plotting. During the end of the second act of the movie, the Earth's military destroys the main Na'vi habitat, the home tree. Pilot Trudy, played by Michelle Rodriguez, decides that she doesn't want to take part, so in dereliction of duty, she conspicuously flies away from the bombing. And yet, she not only isn't promptly arrested for disobeying a direct order in an environment where bombing a native population is the order of the day, but she's actually able to help Jake Sully and company escape from the brig with relatively little trouble. Seems as though few characters would be in a worse position to launch a rescue than conspicuous insubordinates. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty about how interested audiences are going to be in James Cameron's upcoming sequels to his mega hit. Hopefully, he's had enough time to remove holes like these from these follow-up scripts. Number 9. Blade Runner 2049. Although it failed at the box office during its 2017 theatrical run, the fact that it was the 17th best-selling title on home video in 2018 indicates that it's gradually developing its own following. Serving as one of the most belated sequels in film history, it both attempted to have firm, direct connections to the 1982 original and also go its own way. These dueling interests, though, they unsurprisingly got in each other's way a little bit. The biggest hole in the plot concerns the villainous business mogul Wallace and his relationship with the bioengineered clones called replicants. In 2049, it's explicitly stated that they've all been designed to be infertile, as well as being outlawed in the wake of a devastating terrorist attack that destroyed all digitally stored records around the world. Wallace believes that bringing back the replicants is the way humanity will spread through the stars, and to that end is both engineering some of his own and is on the hunt for a replicant that supposedly reproduced in defiance of her genetic programming. But as denofgeek.com pointed out, Wallace himself says that the inability of replicants to reproduce was one of the things that allowed people to reassure themselves that replicants were subhuman. He also explicitly states that humanity lost its taste for slavery. So if he holds those beliefs in his head, keeping reproducing replicants, the humans that bred with them and their offspring around, are the exact opposite of what he would want. Indeed, he would want to destroy anything that could point to the existence of a fertile replicant if he ever hoped to sell people on having replicant slaves again. It's the sort of inconsistency that's particularly frustrating in a movie that stars an ostensibly grounded villain. Number 8. Star Trek from 2009. J.J. Abrams' reboot of the Star Trek films was a smash hit, although the series it launched seems to have stalled in 2016. Shamelessly emotional nearly to the point of being operatic, it was kinetic and action-packed enough that audiences didn't have the time to question the mechanics of the plot. However, the villain Nero's story made so little sense that it required more effort not to think about it than it did to actually think about it. The primary setting for the movie is during the time when James T. Kirk ascends to be the captain of the Starship Enterprise. In the future, it turns out that the planet Romulus is going to be destroyed by a supernova. Also in the future, Spock, another crew member of the Enterprise and essentially Kirk's right-hand man, tries to stop the supernova, and he fails. A Romulan from that same future, named Nero, acquires both a ship and time-traveling ability and goes back in time to get revenge. This includes destroying Vulcan, Spock's home planet, and also Earth. What never ever, for any reason, gets addressed in the plot is why Nero doesn't use the time machine to go and save Romulus. With time travel technology, he could make numerous attempts to save his planet and offset Spock's eventual failure. But no, vengeance for something which hasn't happened, and which is no doubt on some level preventable, is only viewed as a reason for him to be a one-dimensional villain, which unfortunately, at the end of the day, he really is. This goes to show that time travel should be avoided unless absolutely necessary if a movie's story is going to hold up to repeated viewings. Number 7. Star Wars: The Last Jedi. If you've been on YouTube for the past year, you probably had some video recommendations to you that would insist the storytelling of this hit didn't match real-world logic very well. There were even seemingly erroneous reports that Russian troll farms were being used to spread negative statements about it online. Whatever your feelings about all of that, there's a particular point that many have used as the centerpiece of their arguments. For the dedicated nitpicker, there's very little arguing with it. At the end of the second act, our heroes are escaping their main vessel, unaware that the villains in pursuit of them have their escape shuttles dead in their sights instead of being distracted by the decoy vessel. Admiral Holdo, in a suicidal last-ditch effort, turns the decoy vessel around and sets the ship to travel at hyperdrive. Previous movies in the Star Wars series had portrayed how carefully ships would pre-program a route to avoid colliding with all sorts of space hazards, and he rams it into the villain's flagship with devastating results. This begs a pretty obvious question. Why, in 8 Star Wars films, was Holdo the first person to do this? If it allows such an outsized ship to take out its pursuer, why haven't pilots in suicidal straits rammed the ships of the heroes and villains time and time again? We've been shown numerous pilots willing to give up their lives for the cause. Indeed, the movie begins with a scene featuring a pilot doing just that. It seems as though screenwriter Rian Johnson thought he'd found a hole in the canon that he could cleverly exploit, but what many will do is insist that he found a weakness in the design of the intellectual property that he should never have called attention to. Number 6. Star Wars: A New Hope, Return of the Jedi. Before a tag team of Spielberg and James Cameron one-upped this film time and time again, this 1977 smash hit was the most successful in world history. It made plot mechanics like the mystical Force and the twist that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father household reference points. In Star Wars: A New Hope, Darth Vader takes Princess Leia captive and interrogates her at length over the hiding place of the main rebel stronghold. Later, long after Leia and Luke have learned that they're siblings, Darth Vader uses the Force to learn that his son Luke has a sister so that he can antagonize Luke by threatening to capture and convert her. This opens up a giant inconsistency for the first film regarding why Vader wasn't able to use the Force to discover that Leia was his daughter, or if he was too concerned about the rebel base to care about that, why didn't he use the Force to learn where the base was? By Return of the Jedi, Luke is quite attuned to the Force, but Leia has no such stated defenses in the first film. The only explanation for this is depressingly simple. The Force was largely an afterthought for George Lucas while writing the film, and he had no consistency in what it could do while concocting it by the seat of his pants. We're not going to get on any high horses about what people devote YouTube channels to, but anyone who acts as if plot and logic lapses in Disney's new Star Wars films are some kind of ruinous new occurrence, well, they're in for a nasty shock. Plot holes have been prominent features of this series from its very conception. Number 5. The Thing. A critical punching bag and box office bomb when it was initially released, this adaptation of John W. Campbell's 1938 Who Goes There is now one of the most beloved horror science fiction works ever. Its story of a team of American Antarctic researchers stuck in Outpost 31 who have to deal with an organism that can infect and turn any member of them into a deadly monster is as scary now as it was unpleasant at the time of its release. It's helped immeasurably by how tightly and believably constructed it is for a movie about dealing with an alien, except for one big cheat. The problem with this otherwise tight as a drum story is the need to have a device of some kind that can handily convince the survey team that they've conclusively beaten the alien. So Carpenter wrote that the Antarctic team has flamethrowers. As critic Scott Ashlin asked, why would a research team have flamethrowers? If there's some piece of equipment that needs to be thawed in the extreme cold, setting it on fire is just about the worst approach, and the fire that a flamethrower shoots is much too difficult to control in a survival situation. Fortunately, the flamethrowers are introduced in a scene that's so harrowing that most viewers are too busy being relieved at their temporary effectiveness to ask any questions. Number 4. Terminator II: Judgment Day. Avatar showed that James Cameron was able to hit pay dirt despite his films having plot holes, but in 1984 he practically required it of all his work with his groundbreaking variation on the trendy slasher film model. A film wherein an artificial intelligence network sends an android assassin back in time to prevent the existence of a resistance leader while another soldier from the future tries to stop him, that's such a complicated setup that it all but demands paradoxes and inconsistencies to be woven into the fabric of the film, but, well, there's also a pretty clear hole in the basic setup. In the first film, the reason the T-800, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, has organic skin on him is because the machine doesn't send inorganic robotic matter through without an outer organic material to effectively trick the machine. But in the 1991 sequel, the artificial intelligence network sends through a liquid metal robot called the T-1000, which is stronger than the T-800 unit and has the ability to shapeshift. So how can this robot have the vitally important organic layer if it's entirely liquid metal? Number 3. Time enough at last. It's one of the two most famous and beloved episodes of the original run of The Twilight Zone, tied only with To Serve Man with its It's a Cookbook reveal. The 1959 episode follows compulsive reader Henry Bemis through his frustrating life, through the destruction of his known world and the rest of humanity to the potential sanctum of a library, and then through a hydrogen bomb and into the private hell of his glasses shattering just as he's collected all the books that he wants with all the time in the world to read them. It's one thing to not show the effects of radiation in a TV show shot in 1959, as the average person barely even understood what radiation was at the time, but surely everyone knew how flammable paper is. So, in a powerful bombing to kill everyone for untold miles except a man sheltered in a bank vault, well, how did a bunch of books that were practically out in the open of a destroyed library not get burned up? Number 2. Silent running. It's hard to imagine a less commercial idea for a movie than an environmentalist and his robot friends floating through space taking care of a biodome forest. This 1971 sci-fi classic also features a sequence where said environmentalist Freeman Lau saves that forest by killing his 3 crewmates aboard his spaceship Valley Forge. But there's well over an hour of running time before that's over. While Silent Running is intellectually vigorous and honest in how the story plays out, it's no surprise that today its most significant influence is inspiring the recently rebooted science fiction comedy show Mystery Science Theater 3000. A major conflict for the last third of the film is that the forest in the biodome is beginning to die, illustrated by a number of plants wilting and losing their leaves. After a lot of fretting and impotent rage, Lau has an epiphany. His forest is dying because it's not getting enough light, and he has to drift away to break off radio contact with his superiors and claim that the ship is grievously damaged. His solution is to post a bunch of lights throughout the dome, which begs the question how an expert environmental conservation could possibly fail to notice the importance of light in sustaining a forest for any period of time. It's a bewildering lapse in environmental logic in a story so passionate about the environment. Number 1. Dune. This 1984 film is notorious for a contentious production and for its director David Lynch disowning it. With such popular source material and such striking production design, it couldn't help but attract a substantial cult following anyway. It probably didn't hurt that Frank Herbert had some nice words to say about how it was a visual feast either. Paul Atreides, the hero of the story, is driven from his home with only his mother Julia at his side into the horrible deserts of the Arrakis when the Harkonnen effectively conquer the planet. There, he trains and equips the Freemen, a race of extremely hard-scrabble desert people, with laser guns. These laser guns are powered by the human voice. They're instrumental in the final battle when House Atreides reconquers the planet. The problem is, where did Paul get these guns? He and his mother certainly weren't carrying them or the raw materials to make them during their hasty escape. No one tells Paul how to build one, so even if the Fremen had the resources to make one, he should have no better idea than them. It might as well be Lynch just telling the audience, if you don't get this, the problem isn't on your end. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below. Also subscribe, brand new videos every day of the week. Leave us something else to watch right now. Check out some videos linked to on the screen. And as always, thank you for watching.